Hi, this is Michael Sean Conaway. I have Rachel Morrison with me from Boldly Now. We have the great pleasure of interviewing Julian Guderley. He is the host of the Green Planet, Blue Planet podcast, a social innovator and a thought leader. Welcome to our conversation, Julian.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Great. Right now we're in the midst of kind of, I think, two explosions. One is, a pandemic. We're dealing with our health and these social distancing things and this whole notion of what economics and economy is. And at the same time, we're seeing, huge amounts of generosity, of new thought, of new possibility. Tell me, what's going on over there for you? What is your, what is your life like right now? And what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think these are unprecedented times for people who are living through them, right? Like none of us has been through a pandemic. The last one has been like 100 years ago or so. I think we're at large really privileged to how we're experiencing it. I have lots of downtime myself, which means just everything moves a lot slower. When I sit down to create, it's like there's a lot more creative energy available. Certainly, I am spending a lot of time on my screens, which I'm usually balancing with time out in nature or, just going to the ocean and finding that balance. But I think at large, what we're really observing is Mother Nature, no matter which way you want to address and kind of tackle this topic, but Mother Nature is creating a pause or a gap for humanity to dive deeper, to evolve, to wake up, to create this reflection on the society we've built, And if you think of it, there is what we know about COVID-19, I think for sure at this point is it's a pulmonary issue. It's a breathing issue, right? And all of the very big infection places in the world have been connected to places that had a very severe pollution and air pollution going on, like northern Italy, like parts of China, like parts of the US, like New York City. And I think at the very minimum, what we're seeing is a reflection on the way we've built our society. We can't keep going like this. It is literally choking people to death. And I think it has a lot to do with pollution more than anything else.
Yeah, great. And then, of course, we've seen these positive impacts on the climate from less driving and less air pollution in the world. I hadn't really thought about that part of the vulnerability to COVID actually could be from a distressed respiratory system. And in a way, I think we talk a lot about, how, our pollution is distressing the respiratory system of the planet at the same time. So it does seem to be related. And, as you start to think back, before COVID, like what your, plans and missions were, how have things changed? Like, what are you seeing as your future? And how has that changed from this period of time?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. Maybe to complete the thought about the respiratory part of COVID, I think it's also connected to like deeply rooting into the soil. So the way we've been treating soil and been depleting it with our industrialized agriculture and economy, all of this kind of plays together, and COVID could be seen as a reflection of that to now us humans kind of adapting, upgrading, evolving. And so this is kind of what's happening in my own work too. In the last years, I've, followed a lot of inner guidance, inner stillness and listening into creating what is now the Green Planet, Blue Planet podcast, which is really like a funny kind of paradox. I've had to listen a lot to then listen to others and interview them. But what it really guided me to do is to bring out this cohesive message of regenerative, I don't want to really call them earth warriors, but people who have a consciousness that includes earth and people. Not above profit, but maybe kind of in connection with profit. And so the answer to your question is, for me, what started to happen is a lot more focus on the work that I'm doing and a lot more visibility to, okay, so what I'm curating here, these hundreds of people that I'm weaving together into the Green Planet, Blue Planet hub or cohort of people that I interviewed, and then the thousands and tens of thousands of people listening, I can see that there's a connection between them. I don't know fully yet where this is going to flourish once events can pick up again and how we can all meet around the world again. But I see that the work is becoming more important about letting people see and believe that a world that works for everyone is possible. And then there are hundreds, if not thousands of people making their way to co-create and build this together.
Yeah, and do you see any kind of new possibilities or new avenues
Yeah,
emerging right now?
I think what we're going through is like a rewiring of some sort, and a rewiring to what is really important to our hearts and souls, what makes sense to our minds as well, in the sense of, you know, now we, as you said, like with humanity not traveling for just 2 months, a lot of the statistics around pollution are already going down. So maybe we're seeing instantly some of the new possibilities might be connected with more coherent ways to interact either with the planet, with each other, across countries. But then I think it also comes down to excitement. Like, what are we actually as humans excited to interact with? What are we, you know, in my belief system, we're consciousness in a body, and we're here to expand into, you know, like expand into expression. And so that expression, I think, is challenged right now. What is not possible at the moment are events and gatherings, as we know. And so I think at some point there will be quite a demand of that picking up again, where people will want to choose really wisely, who am I meeting, why am I meeting them, and where am I meeting them? And so I think the why am I meeting people and why am I at this place in the first step is going to become much more front and center for people. Kind of like, you know, just working at a high paid job with no soul and negative consequences for the earth, just to go to the Bahamas for vacation once or twice a year. I think that kind of turned sour in itself for a lot more people than it has been just like 2-3 years ago, because it became so visible now. And that's where my hope kind of rests, is that we can see more of these small examples kind of amount to a bigger behavior change. And so more readiness for messages like green planet, blue planet, and a world that does work for everyone.
Yeah, great. And as far as some of that regenerative conversation, you know, do you see that now starting to reach into cities? I mean, a lot of it has been in, you know, like in developing countries or in, you know, around agriculture and stuff like that. But, you know, like we're pinned up in these cities, and many of us are at least. And you know, like, how does that start to reach into the urban populations really that have been hit hardest by this?
Mm. That's a great question. I'm not sure if I totally know how it's going to reach cities opposed to, you know, more rural kind of areas. What I'm observing is that the trend of people going to the city comes with a really big hope, with a hope for employment, money, social connection, all of the play of the modern times that we're kind of hoping for, right? But the city hasn't really fully lived its potential up to this point in my eyes of observing it. Like, if you look at a place like New York City, world famous, almost like being the capital of the world, but at the same time with all the downsides of poverty, of crime, of, you know, decades of trying to fix these things and not really ways out. And so I think if we look at cities right now and regenerative themes, there's a lot of work to do. And so cities are the places for people that really feel inspired to get their hands dirty and be part of new ways of how it makes sense to, for example, bring food to a city or even grow food in a city, right? Like, we know that big cities have turned into food deserts. And so I think right now in 2020, going into this new decade, we're seeing a lot of people that are connected to the regenerative way of thinking, feeling, and being spread out into actual communities, or try out how it feels to live in communities or with multiple people. I don't think that necessarily goes for cities quite yet. So I think maybe in cities even we'll see, you know, like a little bit more of the problems, just quite obvious, because that's where they're most apparent. And then from there, I do think cities will, over short or long, actually step into their potential of being these like places for serene kind of synchronicity, where, you know, if every person in every morning would do their morning practice and like tune in and do their prayer and then go out in a 10 million people city, they would instantly meet their match.
Right.
But we're not quite there yet, because the infrastructures, the ways we generate food, the ways we set up the space isn't really allowing for that full unfolding. And so I think cities might for a while really attract those people who can get their hands like most dirty, quotation marks here.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'm thinking a little bit about you, and, you know, like I've been following your progress along as you've developed your podcast and, you know, kind of your voice in the world. You know, what's in there in you that just feels really bold? Like, you know, like you're thinking about the next decade of your life. what's emerging for you as something you want to take a hold of that's big and bold and maybe even beyond what you know how to do right now?
Yeah, it's definitely beyond what I know to do right now. I think when it's bold and big, I love this question. It's the really big topics, like why are we on this planet? Why are we on this planet right now as a collective of 8 billion people? Question number one is, can the planet hold 8 billion people or maybe even more? Yes or no? If you're on team no, that means you're believing in depopulation. I'm not on that team. If you're in team yes, that means 8 billion people can live in harmony in a form of abundance together on this planet. And so to close this gap, there's a lot of work to do. And it's not just work in terms of rearranging distribution and finding ways of how we can get food, water, and shelter to everyone, but it's really also a form of, it's a lot of consciousness work and narrative work, because we have a lot of really strong and powerful players in the world that do not believe that the planet can hold 8 billion people or more. And so since we're all here, and since I believe in life, and kind of, I think the biggest turnaround would be turning around this death culture that is dependent on fossil fuels, that is dependent on ultra wealth in that sense. And so I don't know exactly where it's going to take me and all of us, but I sure hope we can close some of those gaps that we currently formulate as the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. This next decade, I truly hope that everyone watching and everyone I've ever interviewed, and me included, we can make it into a golden decade of change on a planetary level, where we understand our role as humanity in the cosmos, floating in space.
Yeah, I love the notion, can 8 billion live in harmony? And I think one of the things that has to go out the window to achieve that is kind of this acceptance of the fact of radical poverty, that 2 to 3 billion people on the planet, live in conditions that the rest of us would never want to live in. And that right now our current economic system, really, that's just part of the equation. And if no matter how you do the math in the current economic system, there will always be 30%, 35% that are living in really tough conditions. So I think certainly the way that we value human beings and we distribute value to human beings have to be a place that would have to change there. It's interesting because we talk a lot about it, like, who needs a seat at the table? Obviously the planet needs a seat at the table, and obviously the people need the seat at the table. Which people? Well, all people. You don't get harmony without all people. So I think I see something really big in that. So thank you for bringing that up. It's hard to conceive of all 8 billion people. It's hard to kind of hold them in your consciousness, and especially hold them through time. It's not hard like an intellectual hard, but like an imagination hard.
Mm.
And so, I appreciate that. And
there's a beauty, if I may, there's a beauty about COVID. So it's really hard for humans to empathize with something that doesn't belong into their own life, or something that doesn't actually affect them in their own lives or their own loved ones. And we know this is something we've been, seeing in the human psyche over and over, and we can even relate ourselves if we're honest about it. And COVID-19 now is kind of the opposite, right? It affected people from around the world, no matter how rich or poor, well prepared or not they were. And so these kind of bottlenecks, like what coronavirus is representing, they give us a chance to come out the other side of the bottleneck with a complete new mindset. And so I agree with you that it's hard to kind of visualize 8 billion people. But let's just start there. Do you believe that 8 billion people can live on planet Earth with water, food, shelter for everyone? Yes or no? It's a very simple question. And then from that belief, there's a lot of work, there's a lot to do. But that very initial question, I think there are a few opposing narratives out there that they're not necessarily helping us to evolve our economic or socioeconomic system.
Yeah, well said. I think like those of us who are wanting to reinvent a new world, we don't also sometimes recognize that fascism and totalitarianism actually would like to invent a new world as well. There are some competing narratives for the future of the planet. And I say fascism and totalitarianism because I don't have actually really good, precise language to describe some of these movements that are afoot. But I think there's always been a sense that human beings can be sovereign and enlightened in their view, and then on another hand, that human beings have to be told what to do to have things go well. And you know, you talk about which team you're on. I think we're all certainly on the team of human beings having sovereignty and having freedom and you know, and liberation on multiple levels. Well, great. I'm inspired by this conversation. I'm really excited to see where you're going next. I would encourage everybody who's listening to this to go check out your podcast, Green Planet, Blue Planet. Let's try to keep in touch on this. I think we're pulling on the same thread from different sides. And I do think that what you're doing out there in the podcasting is helpful. You know, people with great ideas having a platform to reach an audience is really one of the first steps to being able to generally have an accepted view and generally have an ability to take actions from a new perspective. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Great. Any last things from anybody? Great. So check out Green Planet, Blue Planet, and we'll be talking to you soon, Julian.
Thank you, Michael Sean. Thank you, Rachel.